Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a Necron Royal Warden. So the first colour that we're going to use is Citadel Black Templar Contrast. I'm going to use this for all the pieces between the armour plates and also most of his weapon. As usual, I'm using this instead of just using black paint because it goes on a lot easier and it does some of the shading for you. It gives you a good idea of where you're going to be putting your highlights to. So next up, we're going to be using Citadel Runelord Brass. We're going to use this for the majority of the armour plates. The only parts that you're not going to do with this is his shoulders and his head. Like so. Next up, it's Citadel Canoptek Alloy. I'm going to be using this for his head and his shoulders. There's a really cool miniature this. I like that they've made the Necron miniatures a lot more dynamic. It used to mainly be the character models who had all the good pose and that kind of thing. But now with these ones they've made the standard infantry looking pretty cool. You've got some really good character models. Also you've got the likes of the Scorpex, Destroyers, things like that, just to really make the Necrons a really interesting looking force. Now we're going to use some Citadel Retributor armour. I'm going to be using this to do the decorations, so you've got the kind of chain around his neck. We're going to do a stripe up the front of his helmet. Also going to do the almost skirt kind of thing that runs around his left side of his waist. Once you've got both sides of this painted up, we can move on to the next colour. So next up, we're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Leadbelcher, which I haven't shown here. This is just to reapply some of the colour to the blades and the other parts of the weapon. Now the reason I'm applying this is he was originally sprayed with Citadel Leadbelcher, but if you've seen any of the videos, it must have been a bit damp or something. It came out really dull. So I'm just reapplying this just so you've got that nice shine from the Leadbelcher spray. Now we're going to use some Citadel Fulgurite Copper, a very quick layer this. We're just going to use this to do the coils on the side of the weapon here. This just adds a little bit of colour to that part of the Ghost Blaster, just to break up the blackness there a little bit. So next up we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Ushabti bone, and we're just going to use this on the skull by his feet. That's probably the way it's been actually moulded. You've got that little bit at the side there, it looks a bit rough and ragged, so we're going to do a bit of brain inside the skull as well. But for now you just want to paint the outside of it with a nice coat of Ushabti bone. So for the brain we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Pink Horror as the base colour, just to get that nice bright pink colour. Like so. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey just to paint up the rock under his foot. Obviously if you're doing your bases a different colour then you might not want to paint it grey, but I'll be showing this painted grey because that's the kind of base that I'm doing for most of my stuff at the moment. Like so. Now we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo White, any white will do. We're just going to paint these cables here. We're going to paint the two smaller tubes here with white and leave the middle one black. That's so we can do a green glow on these two. The middle one remains black like the Ghost Blaster itself and also the spine that it's coming from. We're also going to do the tube that runs around the base of the Ghost Blaster with the white as well. Now we're going to start shading. We're going to use Citadel Cryptek Armourshade to paint over all of his armour. Make sure you don't do it over the gold, we're just doing this over the Runelord brass and the Canoptek alloy. I've said it before, the gloss on this is really cool, and the way it pools as well, it gives a really mottled effect when you paint it on, when it dries, so it does look really, really good on these. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade. I'm going to use this on the gold. So you've got the parts on his shoulders, the bit down the centre of his head, the stripe, and then you've also got his kind of cape, which is hanging around from his arm and his waist. Also put a bit on the Fulgurite copper. On this you want to make sure that you've got a nice amount of Agrax Earthshade on, so that it gets into all those recesses and makes them stand out. Because when we bring out the colours again, you want those to have the darker bits around the outside. Next we're going to be using some Citadel Nuln Oil. We're going to use this to shade all of the bits that we've just painted in Leadbelcher. Like so. Next we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use this just to paint the skull. Make sure that you get that into the eyes. If the eyes don't get it in there, it looks a bit strange when you've got the Ushabti bone showing through. So if you get a bit of Seraphim Sepia in there just to darken them up, that should be fine. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Carrowbird Crimson Shade. That's just to do the brain and the head, so a really quick layer here. Like so. Next up, we're going to go back to the colours now and start working on the gold. So we're going to use Citadel Retributor Armour. We're just doing the edges of this chest piece. We're then going to recolour the plates that lead up to his shoulders and the stripe down the front of his head that's just off camera as it's getting done there. Now we're going to do the decorations that hang down from his arm and his back. I'm going to highlight these with Citadel Liberator Gold. Now when you're adding this, you want to be thinking about where the light is going to be catching the gold, trying to mainly apply it to there. This will give a good shine to it, as the light's coming from above and catching the edges. This will give a good shine to the gold that you're painting and make it stand out and look really, really cool. So on these parts you're mainly going to be painting the tops. You want to make sure you get these top angled parts on each side as well, because they'd be catching the light. Now we're going to add some Vallejo Model Air Chrome to the Liberator Gold. I'm just going to do some edge highlights just to really make some of those details stand out. So on these little decorations on the neck plates here, you want to make sure that you're doing the top edges to the decorations there, so all the little kind of runes and shapes on there, you want to make sure that you're getting the top edges of each of those to make them stand out. And also the top edges underneath the dent in his head here. So you want to do little bits underneath each of these little circles and the top edges of each of these little coffin shapes. Now we're going to start working on his main bulk of the armour using Citadel Runelord brass again. When you're doing this, you don't want to be doing it 100% smooth. You can do it a little bit streaky, maybe not giving 100% coverage. You want to be leaving a lot of that Cryptek armour shade, so that you can see the shine and the gleam, as well as getting some of this on maybe the top 50% of like the arm plates and things like that, just to give the effect that the light is catching it. If you do the top half of the armor plates like that, it does make it look like the light is catching, giving them a good shine. So we're going to highlight this with the Canoptek alloy. You want to be doing about 2/3 of the area that you just highlighted with the Runelord brass. You just want to make sure that any top edges or anything like that, like the top of his rib cage, those kind of tops of the ribs, you want to make sure that they're highlighted too, so they really stand out compared to the bulk of his chest piece. So with this colour you want to make sure that you do the head and his shoulder blades too. So this is where we're up to so far. Got some nice little effects on the gold there. You can see the shine on his armour coming into effect. So now we're going to add some Vallejo Model Air Chrome to the Canoptek alloy. We're going to highlight all the edges of his armour plate. Now by adding this to the underside of any dents or pock marks in him, or on the edges and top edges of different surfaces, it really brings out the detail in those areas and catches the eye, makes it look like those parts are showing up a lot better. Now we're just going to use some plain Vallejo Model Air Chrome. We're just going to do this badge in the centre of his chest. We're also going to do some highlights on the blades on his Gorse Blaster. As well as doing the underside of any dents and damage to the blade, we're also going to be doing some of the top edges and top surfaces and maybe the edge of the blade with this, just to make them stand out a lot better. Now we're going to go back to Fulgurite Copper for a very quick layer. We're just going to touch up these bits here just to give them a bit of a shine on the edges that will be catching the light, like so. Now we're going to go back to Black Templar Contrast. I'm just going to use this moment to touch up the areas that we've maybe got some of the other colours on. This just ensures that it's got a nice coating of this. And there's no bits of the metallics on the bits that should be darker, because that really does stand out a lot if you've got a black colour and then you get a little bit of metallic on there. So now we're going to start working on these decorations down his side. We're going to start with Citadel Ahriman Blue. This is going to be the base layer for each of these little circles on the chains. We'll be doing each of these as a little gem or a little shiny piece of jade. Although these are a different dynasty, I do quite like the Nihilak dynasty with the gold and jade colours. So I'm going to be doing little parts of that on some of their decorations of the more, I suppose, affluent members of the dynasty. Now we're going to be using Vallejo White. We're going to be mixing this with the Ahriman Blue to make a lighter shade, which we're going to paint on the bottom left hand half in a kind of crescent shape. This is where we're going to start putting the lighter colours so that it looks like our little gemstones and the light's reflecting in them. With all that layer done, we're going to add some more white to it. We're now going to apply this to half of the half that we've just done. So you're going to be applying this to about a quarter of the circle in the bottom left hand corner. Like so. Then we're going to add a little bit more white as before, and this time we're going to be adding it just a tiny little sliver down that left hand side. I'm a little bit too far zoomed out here, unfortunately, sorry about that. But we're basically doing about half again of the area that we did with the previous highlight. So it's just going to be on the very edge of that bottom left hand corner, or bottom left hand edge I should say, no corners on a circle. So you're going to do this to all of them, including the ones around the other side as well. This bit does take a little bit of a while. And finally we're going to use a little bit of pure white. With this you're going to do the tiniest little line on the bottom left hand edge, and then a little dot on the top right hand edge. What you may find easiest to do here is started doing both of the same part. I ended up just going around doing all the dots on each one, and then coming back and doing all the lines on each one. And that just felt like it was a little bit quicker to do. But as long as you're getting that little line on the bottom left and dot on the top right, you will have that kind of light reflection on the gemstones look to it. So this is where we are at the moment with the different metallics and the gemstones finished. Now we're going to start working on the rest of them. So we're going to start by using Vallejo German Grey, and we're going to highlight the black with this. So you want to think about doing the top kind of half of each of these barrels where the light will be catching it, and then also the underside of any damage to any of the black areas too. So on the front and the sides of the barrels you find little dents and nicks in it, so you can just go underneath them and just give them a bit of a highlight so they stand out a bit more. And you also want to work on the kind of skeleton underneath the armour as well, and start putting the highlights in areas where the light will be catching it. Now we're going to use some Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey, and this is going to be to do some edge highlights, just to make the details stand out all over the model itself. I started doing the little lines in the middle there, but you're going to be painting them white, so just ignore them. You just want to be painting the battle damage, the little dents and the scuffs and things like that, and then the edges of any surfaces that aren't going to be painted white and glowing in a while. So you just by adding these little highlights to it. We'll be doing these on the skeleton too, but it really does make them stand out so that you can see all the details on the Ghost Blaster. Now we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo White. I'm just going to paint this tube at the back of his head. I'm just going to start painting these barrels. Now I'll link a little video I did on how to paint these so they look like they're glowing. Really easy method to do it. Takes no effort, no time. I'll link that up here so you can click straight to that if you want to see how I do the glowing parts of the barrels. So now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Biel-Tan green. I'm going to use these just to darken up certain areas of the tubes. So I want to kind of have a strip down the middle of each tube which is really glowing, and then I want it slightly darker above and below that, and at the very top ends where it joins onto the Ghost Blaster, or to the back of his head or into his body. Same here. So I'm using the Biel-Tan green just to darken the white part so that when we add the Tesseract glow it'll already have those shaded areas in there, so it's not 100% the same colour, you do have those different shades of green. Now we're going to be using the Citadel Tesseract glow, so we're going to be using this to paint all of these little balls here. You want to make sure that you're getting some of the Tesseract glow around it too, on those black areas, because that'll make it look like it's got this faint glow inside, coming from those spheres that are getting the full Tesseract glow effect. You're also going to be painting this on all the tubes on him too, so the tubes which you've done the Biel-Tan green, when we're putting that on, you can see there that it's got the darker areas already with the Biel-Tan green. So you're just going to add that to all of these white areas that we just painted. So now we're going to be working on the skull, so we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Ushabti bone. I'm just going to start bringing the colours back out on the skull. like so. I'm going to mix a little bit of Vallejo White with the Ushabti bone. I'm just going to start highlighting the top edges, all the areas on that, just to make them start standing out. Like so. Now I'm going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix. I'm going to give that one final highlight. You just want to be thinking about putting this on the top edges, maybe the tops of the teeth, the bridge of the nose, the top of the, kind of where the top lip joins the nose as well, around that area. Little highlights above the eyes and across the top of the skull too. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Pink Horror. I'm going to add a little bit of colour back to the brain. Like so. And I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Emperor's Children just to add a little bit of lighter colour to those areas too. Like so. So this is what he's looking like so far. We have one final thing to do, and that is to add a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade. We're just going to be applying this into some of the creases, and the dents and scuffs and the ridges on the Gorse Blaster, just to give them a slightly aged look. And with that, we have the finished Necron Royal Warden. That's a really cool miniature, really happy with how he turned out. Looking forward to painting up some more Necrons in the coming months. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much. If you liked the video and you enjoyed the channel, please consider supporting us by buying us a coffee on our coffee page linked below. Thanks very much.